Most people do not see God at work in their personal lives and therefore do not know how to join Him. This Divine Appointments podcast is to encourage you in your faith, to open your eyes to seeing God's hand at work. My hope and prayer is that by hearing these stories, you too will engage where God is already working and discover God's mission for your life. Welcome to my Divine Appointments podcast. I would like to welcome my friend Austin Anderson tonight, and he has a really, really neat story. He was part of the Go Tell Crusade, a crusade that took place in Forest in Scott County in 2019. Is that right?
I think so.
And we were talking about what's coming here in October, and so he has a really fascinating story. He was a youth minister at the time, and he's going to share some of that and how it impacted his life. First, I want to read my Divine Appointments theme scripture, and that's Psalm 105, verses 1 through 5. Give thanks to the Lord, call upon His name, make known His accomplishments among the nations. Sing to Him, make music to Him, tell about His miraculous deeds, boast about His holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and the strength He gives. Seek His presence continually. Remember the miraculous deeds He performed, His mighty acts, and the judgments He decreed. So, Austin, tell me what your job position is now.
Well, I own a mosquito control business, but I also just recently came on staff with Young Life in the area. And so I get to hang out with guys from Jackson Academy and Jackson Prep, and also hang out with some leaders. And so it's been a good time. I've been the chaplain for the JA football team this season, and that's been an absolute blast. But that's what I'm doing right now. I'm killing mosquitoes and hanging out with kids.
Sounds great. So I've known Austin's family for a long time, and now he is actually at our school and pouring himself out with these young guys, football and sports and camps. And but in his previous life, he was a youth minister.
I was.
So talk about that.
I was a student pastor for about 8 years. First church I was at was First Baptist Brandon. I was there for quite some time. Then I took a job at New Liberty in Morton, the community of Branch, which is where I kind of got my Go Tell experience. And then most recently I was at Brandon First United Methodist Church before stepping out after COVID and taking a break.
Okay. So we were talking a little bit about his work with Young Life, and can you just explain what Young Life is for people that may not know?
Yeah, absolutely. So Young Life is it's a parachurch ministry. Our mission is to reach adolescents with the gospel. We want to introduce young people to Jesus, and we do that by coming alongside local churches. We're not a competition for youth groups or anything like that. Like our goal and our mission is to go reach the kid that's not showing up at church. We want them to come to know Jesus. And when they've reached a point in their discipleship journey with who Jesus is and who He's calling them to be, like, we want them to find a local church, because Young Life ends. You graduate out of Young Life at some point, but you never graduate from the church. And so our job, our goal, what our mission is to go out there, find those kids who need to know Jesus, introduce them, and then bring them to church. That's the goal.
That's the goal. So you're kind of the bridge between the two, right?
Absolutely.
And it's really hard to get young people, young kids, interested in going to a church.
Yeah, it can be intimidating, especially if you didn't grow up in a church, or you're currently living a lifestyle that you know might be looked down upon at a church. And so we just kind of create a less intimidating environment for a kid to show up and be who they are. And we just meet them there with Jesus.
And you kind of have a heart for that, especially?
100%. 100%. I've been that kid.
Were you that kid?
I've been that kid that didn't necessarily belong in a church. And so those are the kids that I have an affinity for.
Do you want to share a little of that story? I didn't ever ask
Yeah.
you all of that,
So
how you came to faith.
I grew up in a household with a single mom, no dad. I never met him. And, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, there's not a lot of room for single moms in churches. And so my mom did a really good job of raising me around church, but we were never super involved or plugged in a specific church. But when I was in middle school, you know, as middle schoolers do, they start going to youth group. And so I did, starting in the 6th grade.
Somebody asked you to go?
A couple of my friends were like, hey, we're going to youth group tonight. And I told my mom, and we went, and she ended up going with some other single moms to a coffee shop down the street, and they kind of did their own thing, which was a pretty cool setup for them. But that was my first real memory of okay, this is church. This is what this looks like to be involved. But that was just kind of going through the motions, you know, doing what a kid does. I went to church camp after my 6th grade summer, woke up from this powerful sermon that someone preached, meaning I was asleep. And I realized that my friends had walked down to the front of this big room, so I just followed them. And I was met there by someone who guided me through these words to say and this prayer to pray. And I was told I was saved, which was news to me. But, you know, still did the church thing. But in high school, between my, really, I think it was my sophomore year of high school, I knew a lot about who Jesus was, but I didn't know Jesus. And I had an aunt who passed away. She was 6 months pregnant. She was 33 years old.
Wow.
Her placenta burst in the middle of the night, which is just rare, and she bled internally all night long, and we lost her. And she was kind of the glue that held my family together. And I remember at her funeral, people would come up and they would tell us, I know Jesus because of Emmy. I was in college with Emmy. We were in a sorority together. She taught me who Jesus was.
Wow.
I know Jesus today because she shared the gospel with me. And as a 15-year-old who knew a lot about Jesus, that didn't sit well with me, because it just seemed like, how could this person who clearly loved Jesus, clearly told all of these people about him, how could this happen to her? It just didn't sit well. It didn't seem fair. And so I got angry. I lashed out. I looked for ways to push people away. And I became that kid that didn't need to be at a church, that needed to be at a church, but wasn't showing up. And luckily I had a friend who just entered into my life at the right time. And I didn't know it for the longest time, but his dad was a student pastor. They never pressured me into showing up at church. They never even asked me to really go. They just embraced me in their home. And summer between my junior and senior year of high school, they were like, hey, we've got a spot to go to camp. Would you like to go? And I knew what camp was, and I was like, man, I'm not doing this again. I'm not interested. And I remember my friend, his name was Ethan, he just said, well, just think about it. The spot's yours if you want it. And I ended up going to Boiling Springs, North Carolina, to a camp called Crossroads, where Clayton King shared the gospel in a room full of what had to have been 1,000 kids, but it felt like he was talking to me. And I met Jesus for the first time. That was the first time that everything that I knew about Jesus connected to my heart. And I realized that he did care, and he was present, and he does love me, and that he is worthy of praise, and that this throne that's over my life is not mine to sit in, but it's his. And so I gave my life to the Lord before my senior year of high school. I showed up at Mississippi College and ran into some guys who were going to hold me to it. And I learned what discipleship looked like.
Wow.
And one thing led to another, and I ended up on staff at a church somehow.
Wow. And still in ministry.
And still in ministry.
That's great.
I've tried to run from it, but can't.
The Lord just keeps tugging at
Yeah,
your heart, huh?
absolutely. Charles Spurgeon says that if God's called you to be a servant, don't stoop to be a king. And
Wow.
I tried to stoop.
That's it.
It's not working.
So, can you tell about another young man that you had in your youth group during that time when the crusade came to town? Can you talk about that story?
Yeah. It's funny because when you called me and asked me about my experience with Go Tell, I told you that it's best told just through this story. And so I was super reluctant to take my students to Go Tell when it came. But I went anyway, took students, grabbed my leadership team, and we went to the training for them to learn how to, have the conversation with a student who was responding to the gospel. And one of my students missed the initial training, but the night of the youth event at the actual crusade, I met him there early. We walked through the training, and at the end of it, he just kind of looked up at me and was like, "Austin, I don't think I've ever made this decision for myself." And
Did you have any idea that he felt that way?
I had no idea leading up to that. He was on our student leadership team. He'd grown up in the church. His family was super involved in the church. Like, he was, I think, probably the first kid to fill out our student leadership application form. Like, he was super involved. And when he looked at me and asked and told me that and was like, "I don't think I've ever done this for myself," I was like, "Holy cow, maybe there was a reason we're here. Like,
Right.
maybe this is the reason we're here at Go Tell, for this conversation." And so we talked through it, and I was like, "All right, man, like, if this is something that you feel like you need to do, like, let's do it."
Yeah.
And so we prayed together, and he prayed to receive Christ. And that's not even the coolest part of the story. Like, later that night, I watched this same kid who had just gone through the training, just realized and confessed out loud, "Hey, I don't think I've ever made this decision for myself." I watched this kid then lead 3 of his friends to the Lord later on that night.
Wow. That's just incredible.
Yeah, incredible is almost not even enough to describe it.
Yeah.
It was really cool. It was a really cool moment, a really cool experience, and it changed my perspective on ministry.
What did you mean by that?
So as a student pastor, I was always really protective of my students. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to take them somewhere, that the product that they were going to get was excellent. I don't think that, I do everything with excellence, but I wanted to make sure that whatever my students got was the best, or at least the best effort. And I wasn't sure what that would look like with a crusade that I didn't really have much involvement with, if that makes sense. But it changed my perspective, because a lot of times in ministry, I wanted to have those conversations with my kids. Like, I wanted to have those moments on a Wednesday night where the gospel was shared and they would respond at church, at our church, where we had, been praying and where we had been laboring. And I realized that that's not a really great way to look at it. And also realized that students are more capable than I give them credit for. In Paul's letter to Timothy, his second letter to Timothy, Paul writes to him and he says, "What you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." I got to see that verse come to life when this kid received Christ, took what he had just learned, and then went and shared it, immediately. Like, we got to entrust him with this message that he just received, and he went out and immediately proclaimed it and shared it boldly with his peers. Like, when I saw that a student was capable of that, I was just like, why aren't we doing this more often?
Right.
Like, Why am I withholding from them these opportunities?
Right. So what would you say to any kid out there who may not want to come to church, or any youth pastor who may not want to bring kids, or pastor? What would you say that Go Tell, or this crusade specifically, gave you, or what would you tell them to think about?
I would just say, think about T-ball, right? Like, don't be so reluctant to just step up to the plate and hit the ball that's already put on the tee for you. Because I feel like that's what Go Tell is. If anything, look at it as a resource, because the gospel is going to be proclaimed. The work is going to be done. Like, it's done. All you have to do is show up and bring students, bring people to Jesus. Like, there is no doubt in my mind that Jesus' name will be glorified and lifted high. And so if the goal at all of our churches is to proclaim the name of Jesus and see people have life-changing experiences by following him, then show up.
Just show up.
It doesn't have to happen within the confines of your own wall or on your own campus. Like, let it happen somewhere else. It's not that complicated. Just show up.
Just show up.
Come see Jesus. I mean, think about what happened in the New Testament when people had an experience with Jesus. They ran and they got people. They said, come and see.
Come and see. That's right. That's right.
So I guess if I had to say anything to other student pastors or students or ministry leaders in our area, just come and see.
Come and see. And don't take for granted that church-going youth.
Yeah, even the kids on your,
may not need
your
to come.
youth student leadership team. Yeah, they still might. They might need a conversation.
That's
and
right.
You never know what's going on in the heart of a student.
Do you see that in the schools too, in the dealing with the football teams and the young life meetings? Do you see that?
Yeah.
The need is there.
The need is great. We are up against it when it comes to the gospel message and Jesus versus what the world is offering. I mean, the world is loud and it's chaotic, and the message is thwarted, and it is aimed at the heart of every teenager. And if we can just shield those hearts from the bullets that the enemy's flinging at them and put Jesus right there in front of them, like, they need him now more than ever.
Absolutely. Well, what's your favorite scripture?
A long time ago, I used to echo the prayer request of Paul. Pray also for me, so that whenever I'd open my mouth, words might be given, that I might fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. But it's changed to what Paul writes to Timothy. The purpose of a ministry leader, the job description. It's what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also.
Go tell.
Go tell.
Thank you so much, Austin,
You're
for
welcome.
sharing. Appreciate you so much.
Thanks so much for watching this episode. Now you engage where God is at work. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you will be notified of future episodes.